Thank you for joining us for this special report on WCTV. I'm Madison Glazier. Over the next half hour, you'll hear powerful and sometimes graphic accounts of the Ukraine war from those who've lived through it. Some of the families we'll introduce you to are living safely here in Tallahassee. Others are still overseas and uncertain of their future. But through it all, they remain resilient. But to understand what's happening in Ukraine now, you need to understand how we got here. The country has a long history of fighting for a real shot of democracy. In December 1991, the people of Ukraine voted for independence, setting off decades of back and forth on what exactly that would look like. Fast forward to March 2014, a pivotal moment as Russia seized Crimea. Despite that, Ukraine took steps toward progress anyway, voting Volodymyr Zelensky into office on April 21st, 2019. 2 years into his presidency, the United States warned the world last November that an invasion was imminent. That brings us to 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, and the fighting continues. For millions of Ukrainians, the constant barrage of screams, bombings, and collapsing buildings have become the norm. Every single day brings new dangers and difficulties. The promise of a better future has attracted more than 100,000 Ukrainian refugees to the U.S. So far, a few of those families are rebuilding their shattered lives here in Tallahassee. Here now is the story of a young couple who risked everything with their one-year-old daughter in tow.
My husband woke me up at 5 a.m. and said that this is a war.
February 24th, the mark of the start of the Russian invasion. Years of intense friction in the region finally boiling over.
Explosions and shellings are all over Ukraine. There won't be safety in any city in our country.
For Anastasia Solonik and her family, there were few options as the fighting ramped up. They made the unimaginable decision to shelter at home and wait things out.
We were like an animals in a cage with no possibility to escape. No possibility.
Water, electricity, and gas all cut off within the first few days of the invasion, and with no medical personnel to call for help.
You have only yourself, and that's it.
Survival was completely in their own hands.
If somebody died, you have to bury him, because you have no other way. If you have no water, we have snow. We grab snow. When it melts, we drink it. There is no other way to survive.
The Solonics forced to face some of their greatest fears as they tried to keep their daughter safe.
I was paralyzed. I tried to hide her in the flat, but I understand that it wasn't work, you know. I tried to hide her there. When it was shelling, I tried to cover her with my body. I tried to do everything.
They endured for a month before they were once again at a crossroads. This time, the couple agreeing to flee Mariupol, and not a day too soon.
The next day, after we escaped, 3 bombs got inside our building, and the whole house fully burned out. Fully. Like if we were there at this time, we died.
The family has put several months and several thousand miles behind them since that harrowing day in March. Their focus is now on the future as they put down roots in the capital city. I met with the Solonik family at a mutual friend's house, a home that's become a safe haven for refugees just like them. The Solonik family saying they are appreciative of the opportunity to come start a new life when so many others cannot.
We have an opportunity now to be in a safe place, to breathe fresh air, to be healthy. Like, we have now an opportunity to be like people.
A chance at an American dream. A dream that may not have come by choice, but a chance to live that dream regardless.
The Solonik family is just one of the many that fled the country when they had the chance. But that option wasn't available for everyone. I caught up with Larissa Lavrushko, who at the age of 56 says she couldn't imagine having to run for her life.
You wake up suddenly with terrible explosions, and you can't understand what's going on.
Larissa Lavrushko recalling the moment her family witnessed Russian forces encroaching on Kyiv.
So we woke up and immediately I went to my mom's place. She lives 5 minutes walk from my house. I took her and we came, collected some things, and we came to my place. And then we heard this signal of air raid.
Her family taking shelter in a cellar for over an hour. The Lavrushkos saying they knew the dangers of staying in the capital, so they fled to their summer cottage nearly 20 miles away.
We took all the money that we have at home, no necessary things, the dog, my mom, and we all went to the country. It was cold, it was February. Our country house is just a summer cottage.
But cold temperatures uprooted them once again, and the family fled to a different village to stay warm. Once things thawed, they returned to the cottage for good.
We started to live there. We heard the explosions all over Kyiv, and there were most terrible hours and days that we had.
She says the hardest part of moving around was choosing what to bring with her.
I was at a loss. I couldn't concentrate properly what to take if you leave for good.
Staying in enemy-filled territory was a choice she says was ultimately made by age.
We, as we're not young anymore, we decided to live here and to have this lottery. If we stay alive, it's okay. If not, then not.
As the future remains uncertain, she's come to terms with one somber truth.
There's danger in any place at any time, and you never know if you wake up tomorrow, because, every day it happens.
The Lavrushkos still don't know if they will ever get to return home. Now to an update on a story we first brought you back in April. You may remember seeing this video on your screen. Valeria Pechiskova's mother, Zoya, who was crammed on a train alongside other Ukrainians trying to escape. Fast forward to now, Zoya has made it to Tallahassee after a close call. During her journey, the train she was traveling in was under attack. She was trapped for 35 hours on that train, and it took 5 days to get to the border of Poland, where she stayed until she was able to make her way here safe with her daughter.
Now I don't worry that something could happen to them. Now it's kind of different game, because I have to understand that now they are safe and they're here with me. And now I can protect them. It doesn't matter what happens.
Zoya holds an immigrant visa and is now listed as her daughter's dependent. Valeria says that she will now support her mother here in the States forever. A woman in Belarus sharing her unique perspective as her country finds itself stuck in the middle of this conflict. Landlocked Belarus shares a border with Russia and Ukraine. Alexander Lukashenko has served as the first and only president for over 26 years. While he's found an ally in Russian President Vladimir Putin, he remains unpopular in his own country. His election win in 2021 erupted into protest as people called the results into question. Anastasia Kroyer, a native of the country's capital, Minsk, now lives in Tallahassee. She says she believes many Belarusians stand silently with Ukraine because they cannot publicly show their support due to the nearby presence of Russian forces.
You can hear the planes flying over you as well, and you don't know what's going on. They're gonna attack. Whose planes are those? First of all, they're Russian planes, they're Ukrainian. What's going on? It's always a constant fear.
Kroyer says that a win for Ukraine in this war is a win for Belarus and a chance to improve democracy there. And there's still so much more to come this hour. Ahead, we'll check in with our Washington correspondent about what this conflict means for the United States as a whole. But first, we'll talk about the youngest, most vulnerable victims of this war. Up next, you'll hear from a local pilot who witnessed firsthand just how devastating the fighting has been for children. We hope you'll stay with us. And as we head to break, a quick look now at some ways you can help nonprofits that are aiding Ukrainians. We'll have a list of these organizations on our website at WCTV.tv.
With the topic of children, it's always heartbreaking. So we had to show how many are there.
You're looking at video now from a vigil for slain Ukrainian children held in Cologne, Germany. It's hard to process, but the black crosses on display represent hundreds of fallen children killed in the war. 358 crosses in total. A pilot from Apalachicola capturing the images and sharing them with us recently. We first introduced you to John Bone a few months ago. He's been living in Germany doing his part to help Ukrainians. The vigil he attended is something he will never forget. Displayed on the back of each cross, the child's name and the date they were killed by Russian military. Bone recalls speakers fighting through tears as they work to make sure the world will not forget the youngest victims of the war.
You wish that there was more that you could do. You work all day and try to make a contribution. And when you see something like that, you just don't feel like you're doing enough.
Bone remains in Germany, volunteering for the Ukrainian Air Rescue. The organization flies in medical supplies near the front lines in exchange for refugees. A Panama City business owner finding his way overseas long before the war broke out. Patrick Pfeffer made the move to Eastern Europe in 2018 and was living in Kyiv during the invasion. And as you'll hear, his journey was grueling, and it's not quite over yet.
For Patrick Pfeffer, the white sand beaches of Panama City have long been home. Growing up in what felt like paradise, he later traded in this view for Florida State University.
I get my undergraduate degree in business and finance, and I went to law school at the University of Miami.
But Pfeffer wouldn't stay away for long. After graduation, he and his family would open up what would become a hot spot in Panama City called Club La Vila before Hurricane Michael toppled the nightclub.
The last hurricane damaged the club, and I decided not to reopen it.
The damage from the storm, bringing with it the opportunity for another change of scene. This time, Pfeffer would move to Germany and later land in Ukraine in 2018.
People here really love freedom, and the spirit that I see in these people and the hunger for freedom, it kind of inspired me. I wanted to be a part of that movement.
Flash forward 4 years, the Panama City native is now an established businessman who lives in Kyiv. Just days before the invasion, sitting in his home watching American news, he heard the warning that Russia was moving in.
Get American TV here, and on American TV they said it's getting very serious, and if you're an American citizen, we advise you to leave the country.
Pfeffer was concerned for his safety. He booked a week's stay more than 300 miles west in Lviv. Just a few days later, he heard the sounds of the first air raids.
For the next 2 or 3 nights, every single night we had air raids, and they destroyed the airport, or at least hit the airport with rockets and stuff. And I thought, well, this is getting really, really serious now. I need to leave the country. And I couldn't leave. There were no trains running, no buses, no taxis. And I had a really hard time finding a way out.
As panic sets in, Pfeffer made frantic phone calls to friends, finally finding one who could help him to the Polish border. But the closest they were able to get him was 45 miles. And the rest he would trek on foot.
It was me and that lady, because the man who took his wife there, the man can't leave. Ukraine doesn't allow men to leave the country.
Pfeffer was allowed to escape because of his American citizenship. In the frigid February temperatures, they found their way to the border, crowded with thousands of women and children.
I mean, I know crowds because I own a nightclub, a big one. This was about 30,000 people. There was no toilets, no roof, no heat, no drinks, no diapers for babies, nothing. We had to sleep on snow for 2 days before we were able to cross that border.
Pfeffer saying among those horrific scenes, he tried to bring comfort to women and children they encountered.
I'm a man, and they look for me for defense, you know, they look for security and stuff. And I saw a lot of misery. You know, I saw people carrying their pets, their dogs, and their babies.
He is now living safely in Budapest and travels home every few weeks to check on his place, never sure what he might find.
Every time I hear that air raid, I get goosebumps. I don't know exactly where this rocket is going to hit or whether the Ukrainians are going to be able to shoot it down.
Pfeffer says he cannot wait for the days that he gets to return back to his home in Kyiv, and he is grateful for everything that Americans have done for this country. And as we head to break, we want to leave you with more images of some of the faces impacted by this crisis. We hope you'll stay with us. Welcome back. Washington and the world have been closely following all the developments in Ukraine. For more perspective, we want to check in with White House correspondent and senior national editor John Decker. John, the White House has rolled out billions of dollars in aid packages since the invasion in February. Now, how much of a difference is that support making for Ukraine?
It's making an enormous amount of difference, and the Biden administration has touted what a difference it's made, Madison. $5.3 billion has been conveyed from the U.S. over to Ukraine since the very beginning of the year, $4.6 billion of that since February the 24th, when the illegal invasion by Russia into Ukraine began. And it's a significant amount of weaponry. We're talking about hundreds of those unmanned drones, which give an indication about where Russian forces are located. Then you have the anti-tank weapons, the anti-aircraft weapons, helicopters. Altogether, it's a bipartisan effort, not just the administration, it's a bipartisan effort to make certain that the Ukrainian military is sufficiently armed to deal with a significant military threat that Russia poses.
And John, as we know, the fighting may be focused in Ukraine, but it has sent ripples throughout Europe. And you traveled overseas for the NATO summit this summer. Now, how has this war impacted the overall atmosphere in European politics?
Well, NATO, the European Union, they are more united than they've ever been. And that's something I don't think that Russian President Vladimir Putin anticipated when he began this illegal invasion of neighboring Ukraine. They are all speaking from the same page. They are all focused on trying to end this war and also making certain that Ukraine is sufficiently armed to deal with Russia.
And so tell us, what has struck you most about what we've seen in the last 6 months of news coverage?
Well, you remember when this invasion began, Madison, there was talk among certain pundits that this war would be over in a week's time, that the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv, would soon be essentially controlled by the Russian military, and that is far from the case. What has impressed so many people around the world is how the Ukrainian military has fought back.
And any final thoughts on what we should be paying attention to as this conflict continues?
Well, this is an armed conflict, and obviously what we in the West want to see is an end to the conflict, but I honestly don't see that happening anytime soon. In order to even have a ceasefire, the Ukrainians are insisting that the Russians, hand back the territory that has already been gained by the Russian military. They're not going to agree to that. So I see this, as do others, extending for quite some time beyond what we've seen so far. One final thing should be mentioned, Madison. When I speak to leaders from NATO, when I speak to leaders in the Biden administration and also in Congress, they are committed to arming the Ukraine military for however long it takes. There is no desire to end that in any way, which should send a very important message to the Russian military.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back after the break. Stay with us. Before we go, we want to highlight a local group with ties to Ukraine, making a big difference. The Northside Tallahassee Rotary has been working with orphans in Ukraine for 25 years. They've switched their focus to collecting humanitarian aid and emergency items. In phase 1 of their operation, they raised $105,000. They are now entering phase 2 of their initiative.
So many people have been affected, and another 2 million people have left Ukraine and need additional assistance in resettlement. So our thought primarily is that there are still food shortages, there are still medical supply shortages, and there are the big things that need to be bought.
All the funds received go directly to the International Lviv Rotary Club. They are using the money to buy emergency kits. And a quick reminder, all the stories you've seen and many more are posted right now on WCTV.tv. You can find an extended interview with Washington correspondent John Decker, a list of resources, and much more on our website. And as we wrap up this special, Ukraine, the human cost, I want to thank the families in these stories who felt comfortable enough to sit down with me and share what they've been through. Throughout their journey, and even before the war, they looked to their sunflower as a sign of hope. We asked each interviewee about the meaning of the sunflower, and we'll leave you with their words.
See sunflower, like it makes me think about Ukraine. It does.
It's something kind and warm and something good for us.
We have huge fields of these sunflowers in Ukraine, and some people took photo in these flowers, and it's like side of Ukraine.
We use it to make a sunflower oil, and it's really great for our economics because it's a big part of our agricultural business.
In my phone, I have the picture, these yellow sunflowers and blue sky. It's like Ukrainian flag. Sunflower is the flower that turns to the sun and looks like sun, and we believe that it's like hope.
A definite sign of peace and hope for the Ukrainian people, and peace and hope for freedom, peace and hope for independence, and peace and hope for freedom of speech.
The human cost of the war in Ukraine.
Sponsored by Bonn Community Health Center.